I was going to go back to before you were born, probably. Do you remember Arvida? And do you remember Gibson Greetings? Do you remember they had people running Disney that had no idea how to. Roy Disney was like lost. And then they brought that guy in who turned Disney into sort of what it is. Then they screwed up again and put Michael Ovitz in, lured him for $100 million. And we forget, because Iger has brought such an incredible amount of stability and good fortune to the company since then, right? Did you know all that stuff, Ben?
Well, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, so I probably don't know it as well as you do, but I've been around for a lot of
living it, but and it's amazing what it's turned into.
Absolutely.
I mean, it went from children's films to, I don't even know what you call it now, just an incredible media.
Yeah, and Bob, obviously an ABC guy originally, and then made these acquisitions of film studios, Marvel, Star Wars, Pixar, and that's really been the fuel for the renaissance.
I mean, I would never say it's as good a company as Comcast, but they have done extremely well. So you're going to why are you going from 135 to 160? When did you have the 135 target? Because people have had that target for like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
It didn't happen until recently. It finally took off with the streaming, right?
Yeah, look, the stock basically didn't do anything for about 5 years, as you point out, as people were grappling with all the ESPN issues that the company had. Then we were waiting for the Fox deal to close. There were 3 main points in the report yesterday. One, we think their streaming guidance is credible, ambitious but credible. I think maybe second, and probably more important, is that it's not in the stock. So if the market starts to discount success, we think there's real upside. That's how we end up taking our price target up. And the third is we spent some time trying to think about the cannibalization risk of other earnings. For example, if everyone loves Disney Plus, does cord cutting get worse? Do people start buying less DVDs? Those kinds of things. And the point we make is there's going to be a transition. Nothing is linear. Things can be bumpy. But if you look at the other side of this, if they're successful, they end up with probably a better business than they have today in terms of monetization and owning a direct relationship with the customer, which they've never had before.
I would, we talked, I was joking with you before you came on about there is a rivalry, I think, to some extent healthy between Comcast and Disney. The valuation has widened between the two. Is it okay I think having a high-speed internet component for businesses, I'd almost trade that for some of the other pure media assets for Disney. I mean, why isn't that more, why isn't that realized in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think that when you look at the broadband business, it's a phenomenal business, especially in the U.S., and that really anchors the earnings at Comcast.
Doesn't that insulate you from the cord cutting to some extent?
Absolutely.
Which Disney doesn't have.
That's been our cable thesis for a long time. We have an overweight rating on Comcast. I think there's less mystery to that, though. That's a more mature business. The market sort of knows what they're getting with Comcast.
So with mystery, you become a story stock, not a fundamental stock?
To some extent. I mean, I think the reality is that if Disney succeeds in this, they could build an enormous streaming business. And NBC, by the way, may be able to do the same thing. I think we're still waiting for details around NBC's plans there.
And for their big hits, what percentage will be sequels that we know about, and what will be new content?
For Disney?
Yeah. It's like half sequels, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I think we'd call them franchises. They'd probably call them franchises, too.
Think about that, though. Is it 60% franchises?
Well, they have 11 franchises.
Marvel and Star Wars and Toy Story and all the rest of them. But you know what? I go to all of them.
I know.
They have 11 franchises that do over $1 billion a year in retail spend.
Wow.
So there's an...
Oh, you're just talking about like the princess stuff and everything that comes off of it, the princess dresses and all of the retail spend alone, right?
Yeah.
That's just the stuff that they take off.
So there's an enormous amount of content. You're almost overwhelmed with content. Is this a zero-sum game that the better Disney does, somebody else has to lose in the streaming, or can the whole industry continue to grow when Disney really rolls this out?
Look, we think there are going to be a small number of global winners in this space. The economics are daunting. You need to have massive scale, global scale, to generate healthy margins. Netflix is obviously enormous already. They're generating about 13% operating margins today. We think that's going to go a lot higher, but you compare that to some of the TV networks of the past in the 30s and 40s, and you can see you got to be really big. And that's not going to be that many companies. But I do think Netflix and Disney absolutely can be two of the winners. The point we make to investors is the television industry is $500 billion globally. Subscription streaming is less than 10% of that market today. So there's a massive transition. It's going to take a long time. It's actually pretty far along in the U.S. We know who the losers are, but I do think Disney, Netflix, potentially NBC, depending on how they lay out their strategy and execute, all can be global winners.
So the Hulu deal was really good for everyone. Is that the way you view it?
Well, I think it gave Comcast some nice options as they sort of nail down exactly what they're going to do with NBC and the content they license to Hulu.
Right.
And for Disney, they get control of the asset. So I think those were the two main goals for both companies.
And the way they structured the deal, it's that each of them get the upside and each of them get the downside, depending on how things go. Is that?
No, I think Disney probably takes on more risk
Yeah.
and more upside. NBC's essentially
They get some of the upside.
eventually on their way out of the asset, presumably.
There's like a floor, I think.
There is.
Right.
What about Succession? I hear Iger, like when they make me get on that, do you know that thing like this where you're like that? What, it's not a Stairmaster, it's something else. I can do it for like a minute and a half and I almost start crying.
Right.
I hear Iger does that for like 40 minutes in the
Yeah,
morning.
I think every year he gets up 1 hour earlier.
It's a ladder. But so I don't know why we need to worry about Succession since, what is he, 67 or something? That's the new 47. I don't know whether I told you that, but it is. So do we need Succession? Do they have their ducks in a row for that?
Well, you brought up Michael Eisner before. Obviously, that whole succession process was something that really, I
but
think.
why does Iger, I mean, what's his contract run to now? And could
21.
Could it be extended again?
I mean, the board and Bob would have to make that decision. Obviously, it's been extended before. I don't see any reason why it couldn't be
We need to
extended
work on the
before.
corporate guidelines for that. You know what I mean? If we're going to raise Social Security to hire, why are people retiring it? There's some
boards still kick you off at like 65 or 70, which
I know.
is crazy.
I mean, Eisner said, I don't know why this Iger would ever retire.
Right.
Yeah,
Basically.
it's a pretty good job.
and shareholders are benefiting from it too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, I think the message from Disney is he's leaving at the end of 21. There's a process in place. The board is obviously heavily involved in that. What happens then, obviously, who knows? But they'll be sort of a third of the way through this whole streaming strategy they've laid out. So it'll be an interesting time for a transition if it happens.
All right, Ben. Thank you.
Thank
Interesting
you.
meaning perilous time? Seriously, what do you mean? An interesting time for transition?
Well, I mean, when you lay out a 5-year vision that has you going from essentially 0 to 70 million subscribers, and you're now essentially 1 year or 2 years in, to hand the keys to somebody else is an interesting point in time to do that.